Good morning. My name is Reverend Sue Witter, and I am hopefully can be considered a very dear friend of Tracey's, and she and I have been working together to help create a beautiful flow for your annual business meeting coming up immediately after the service and lunch. So I am grateful that she asked me to come and join her for the service, and we're going to do a little dialogue with you. But first, I want to talk to you about what both is the theme for the business meeting and in general for this talk today, and that's lesson from the aspen trees. So who of you know anything about aspen trees? Do you know that they are considered the world's largest living organism? That there is a place, can we shoot up to the next, do we have more or just that one? That's the only one we got, okay. You just, like I said, you can't take me anywhere. So,
it was my fault.
So there is a what is considered to be a aspen forest that is one tree in Utah, the largest one, and it's called the pando tree. And that pando is Latin for I spread. And aspen trees are amazing because they can have thousands of individual trees that come up from the ground, but they have one root system. They have one shared root system. And that one aspen tree can share roots with another tree as far as 40 yards away. Now think about football. 40 yards. You got somebody in football who cranks it 40 yards, you think, hot diggity dog. Not what I was gonna say, but I'm trying to be good. And so it's important to look at the fact that this extensive root system actually becomes the genetic makeup of all of the trees in this forest is identical. It's one tree that has thousands, literally thousands of individualizations. And that really is us, right? We are like an aspen tree. And it is sometimes called one aspen tree. This is only one small part of a larger organism. And together, all of this is considered a forest of one tree. And I think that that's just a beautiful way to look at life. It is a forest of one tree. So what does that mean to us? And for me, Tracey and I were talking on the way up, it's fun for me. I usually don't have an hour and a half of uninterrupted time, where the phone isn't ringing and a spouse or a child or a coworker or somebody isn't going, wait, stop, I need to interrupt you. So for us, it was delightful to talk about this concept of oneness, and we were talking a lot about that. What does that mean to be a forest of one tree? And how does that apply to us? And I think that the concept of oneness is one of the hardest lessons that we teach. And so really that's what Tracey and I want to share a little bit about today. So what does oneness mean to you?
So oneness to me is the ever-present creative force. Some call it God, some call it the great creator, that is present in each one of us. And it isn't any different in you than it is in me. And it's hard to understand that because when life gets in the way, we forget our oneness. We forget when I have a problem with you or you have a problem with me, our atmosphere of thought goes out the window. But when we sit and contemplate the unity or the oneness is just like this. It's the many with the one root structure, with the one thing that's the same in all of us. And what I believe about our philosophy is that we're cultivating the atmosphere of thought to be focused on the root system, the one cause, the one creative intelligence, as opposed to the problem or the world or the objective world. So to me, that oneness is that ever-present, loving, harmonious root structure that gives birth to all individuality.
Mine's pretty similar, but for me, one of the interesting things about the concept of oneness, for me, it's probably the most complex and simple at the same time thing that we teach. Because sometimes it's, well, actually in this room, right, it's pretty easy for us to look around, and if you're showing up here, you probably have a lot of similarities to the people who are showing up here, and beliefs that are showing up here. So it's really easy to look around and go, yes, I'm one with these people. Now, we are rolling through an interesting time in the world where many people want us to focus on our differences as opposed to our similarities. So one of the things that I was stunned by was the first time I heard somebody say, and it depends on which research you're reading, but anywhere from 99 to 95% of our DNA in our bodies is the same as every other living human on the planet. We look different, we sound different, our genders are different, our color is different, our eye color. You know, there's everything that you look at and you go, we can't have 90, let's just go between 95 and 99. So you can't have 97% exact DNA that I do, but we do. Biologically, we do. And so for me, it's to remember that even though sometimes we look different, we sound different, we act different, we think differently, we at our core, at our very fundamental level, have more in common than we do differences. And it is so easy to get caught up in the personality of it all, rather than to say, my job here is to look past that and to look for where we stand and have common ground. It's interesting to me that if you read Holmes in his first book from 1919, I think it was published, he talks about all of the discord and disharmony in the world. And if you read all of the New Thought writers, one of my favorite books is called In the Flow of Life by Eric Butterworth, and he talks about in this difficult time when the world is in such turmoil, and everybody say, in this difficult time where there is so much turmoil and we are so focused on our differences. So looking at being willing to say, how can I look for our commonness? How can I look for what we have the same? I believe that we all want to be loved. We all want to be happy. We all want to feel safe. We just have a million different ways of getting there. Pema Chodron, who's one of my favorite teachers, says, everyone wants peace. We just have dramatically different ways of thinking how you should get there. So for me, that's what oneness is about, is to being willing to step back and say, where can I find our commonness, our togetherness, as opposed to our separateness? Because the truth is, just like in Aspen Forest, there are thousands and thousands of individualized trees. Mm-hmm. And one interesting thing about them is that when one on the surface begins to die, or is sick, new sprouts come up from the roots, not from seeds, but from the roots. So it's a willingness to open up your heart and your mind and say, am I willing to see this differently? One of my most commonly prayed prayers is, Lord, help me to see this differently. I often say when I'm in conflict, we'll say, with someone, I will often say, please God, let me be wrong. Just let me be wrong. I know how to be wrong. It stinks, but I can do it. I am hell on wheels when I think I'm right. And I think most of us are that way, right? It's like, I'm right. Just let me explain to you. Let me just explain to you why I'm right. Because, well, I am, of course. So it's that process. It's that process of looking, being willing to look for the similarities. So one of the other things we talked about on the way up were some of the difficult concepts for us to understand. So what do you think are some of the hardest things that that are most frequently misinterpreted is really how I look at it.
Well, we talked about oneness and remind me, because
So one of them was the concept of accountability, largely.
Yes,
being
taking
responsibility
responsibility.
for yourself
Yeah.
versus blaming yourself.
Yeah.
Why am I creating this?
So I think it's, using the, that we all come here and, well, I mean, we talked about so many things, but we talked about how in our philosophy we can say, you created this. And that's not a very nice way when someone's going through a difficulty to talk about, you created this. But more, we talked about the law of averages and how consciously, when something's going on with us, how our atmosphere of thought draws unto us that which we experience to show us that there's a discordant thought that we're thinking. And we have a tendency to go out through our thinking and our blame to go out into the objective world. And so sometimes in our philosophy, I know it's been hard for me. I don't necessarily apply it to others, but I apply it to myself. Now, how did I create this? How did I get here? And it can really create frustration within myself, because then I'm going around trying to change Tracey instead of looking for the discordant thought and trusting spirit to step into the flow to show me that and so much more. So I think that is one of the harder concepts. We also talked about, when we're going through illness and some of these things that we experience, how it's very important when the law of attraction kind of blew up in what?
The Secret?
The Secret, The Secret blew up, and it really said, it talked to, because the law of attraction really does support our philosophy, but we really have to be careful not to use it to blame ourselves, right? That there's fault. We talked about fault, right? And that it's your fault that you're sick, or your fault that you lost your house, or it's your fault that you lost your job. And it's really not. Fault is not the idea that Ernest Holmes had. Responsibility is the idea that Ernest Holmes had. And I guess I didn't tell you, but Sue and I have known each other for a very, very long time. She was one of my teachers and practitioners. She's been my spiritual mentor. At West Valley, where we attended together, she's known as my spiritual interpreter. So she takes some of my ideas that I am still working on and are somewhat simplified for me, and she expands on them. So, but we really talked about this idea of fault, and that we are all where we are supposed to be, and that it's the thinking mind that creates the idea of fault. But there is no fault. We are where we are at by way of consciousness. You want to expand on that?
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting. I have a very well-worn path in my neural pathways, and it's called bad Sue, bad Sue, bad Sue, because it's so easy to get caught up in blame. And our brains are literally hardwired to look for where there's a problem. And rather than, and it's a fine line. I mean, how do you draw that space between where am I accountable for my piece of this puzzle and where am I not? And it's challenging to be able to say, there's a piece that's mine. There's a belief that I hold, or there's a behavior that's habitual, or there's an idea that and frequently a lot of our beliefs are somebody else's good idea for us. That's one of the biggest questions one of my teachers asked me when we were working through letting go of some old, identifying and letting go of some old ideas. Whose voice do you hear in your head when you hear that? Behind yours, because we make it ours eventually. But is it your mom, your dad, your first minister, a teacher, a spouse, whoever it may be, that we go, yeah, that's true about me. So to be able to look and say, there is a piece of me that's accountable for my choices. It's not the same as bad Sue, bad Sue, bad Sue. That tells me I'm wrong. It tells me I'm stupid. It tells me I'm not enough at some level, whatever it may be. But rather to go, oh, look, here's a belief that I have. So I'll give you a real life one that Reverend Karen pointed out to me just a week or so ago. I have said for a long time, my body will give me what I refer to as a warning shot across the bow. You know, in ocean ship battle, it's like the warning shot comes out. And if I don't pay attention to it, it's usually because I'm doing 150 things more than I should. I've said yes to too many things. My body will get sick because I don't listen to the warning shot. And she looked at me and she went, one day I will get you to stop saying that. I will convince you that you don't have to believe that. Mm-hmm. And I went, I'll have to chew on that one for a while. Because I realized what a strongly held belief it was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for me it was like when you're young and you're trying to get the attention of your parents. And then, my brother had spinal meningitis when he was little, was in the hospital, and my sister followed. And we were in Spain, and I remember just being sat in the lobby saying, sit here, don't move. And, you want your parents' attention. So you learn to be sick, to get attention, And it's a strongly held belief. And I married someone who is lovely, but he doesn't give a lot of attention to being sick. He's like, I got to go to work, drink some soup. So one of my earliest lessons was, how do I take care of myself, and how do I cultivate the attention that little person needs? Mm-hmm. But it was a belief that took a long time for me to see, because it really weaved through the idea of victimization and being what people need, and versus, who are you? And we talked a little bit about this, and the idea of what does this have to do with aspen trees in the community is that we are a collective, and we are looking into 2025 to build a very strong, solid root structure based in the science of mind principles to really hold us as individuals all living our own lives without blame, shame, guilt, and to honor each other where we're at, but to really maintain that root structure. And when one of us is having difficulty, or I was telling Sue, I love the idea of when, maybe it was Africa, or I can't remember what country we talked about, where when one person is having a problem, they surround them with love. And sometimes they just can't handle that much love and energy coming towards them, and it makes them kind of balk. And I go, well, what do you do if they keep leaving the circle? And you said, you keep letting them back in. And that's really a hard thing for our minds, our thinking minds that want to say, well, go ahead, leave, or, I'm not chasing you down, or, my vision for the future is to create a community that is connection. And the aspen trees represent connection. And we want to use the philosophy, right? Because this is what we're all here, is the science of mind philosophy, to build that strength root system to support this center and all the activities that we do, and to allow spirit to be in the flow of it. And we all have personal experiences in our lives that we all found our way here for a reason, right? We all found our way to science of mind for a reason, and the responsibility is being willing to look at ourselves. And I really like the idea of the Pemmitroder, and please you can quantify this or expand on it, of the atmosphere of thought. And the atmosphere of thought is where our attention goes, and it's what's drawn to us unwillingly or willingly, so that we can say when something shows up that this isn't my fault. It's like, oh, what is my atmosphere of thought? What is the mental equivalent? What is the objective manifestation of how, like Adya would say, your orientation towards life? Can you talk more about that?
So for me, it's interesting to look at one of the things that Pema Chodron talks a lot about is, where do we put our allegiance? Do we put our allegiance with what's not working or what's working? And it's so easy. It's a neural pathway that I think that's easier to go, this isn't working, right? Rather than to try to make that jump. And so one of her challenges to people is to say, where do you put your allegiance? And are you willing to shift your allegiance from shame, blame, what's not working, what's wrong, what's bad, to seeing a higher, greater good. And the atmosphere of thought is, so one of the things, so part of the conversation was one of the things that I think that we have a tendency to misinterpret in this philosophy has to do with why are you creating this? And the fact that we're so quick to blame ourselves or someone else for it, rather than saying, there's a piece of this puzzle that's mine, but also then to be able to step even farther back and say, what have I created in my thought process? Not just one thought. How often have you heard in this philosophy somebody said, this is just killing me? And somebody goes, oh, don't say that. Don't say it's killing you. It's like, yeah, probably not my best word choice. And yeah, it might be good for me to look at that. But the truth is that I can say this is killing me one time, and it isn't. I'm not going to die. It's not like a lightning bolt's going to come from the sky and slam me down, or I'm going to have a heart attack in that moment in time. We get so caught up in almost a fear and superstition-based that we aren't willing to say, it's not that one time I say, this is just killing me. It is the atmosphere of thought. It's the number of times. It's how I look at life. It's how I look at what's going on around me that I create this soup that I swim in. The atmosphere of thought. The atmosphere of my thought is what determines, not what one individual word, which is why we teach class here, right? Because we teach, this is about repetition. This is about learning to change. This is about being kind to yourself when you go back to an old belief and then make it choose again. Most powerful thing we teach, I think, is choice. And I don't have to beat myself up for my bad choice. Mm-hmm. I don't have to blame you for my bad choice, although that's much more fun, right? Is it not? I mean, it's a lot of fun to go.
It brings an instant gratification.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For short term.
That's
short
right.
term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you go, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and then you worry about that.
Right.
And then you're like, should I say something? And then you worry about that. Yeah. Yeah.
So the process of being able to not try to shame and blame, but to just open your heart and say, I am human. It's a part of the human experience. There are times that I do make some less than stellar choices, shall we say. And I'm known at work to say, okay, you guys, I'm sorry. I'm starting the day out this way. I have my grumpy pants on. I tried to change them before I left for work, and I failed. So I have my grumpy pants on, and I apologize. Do not listen to what I say. Do not take it personally. This is not meant to be mean, unkind. This is just me being grumpy. And so I will give you a blanket apology for the day if I am an itch on wheels.
And Sue, like, I think it's interesting because you're the one that helped me with the story of you measuring your own barometer. When the barometer is lower, and you know how you become your own facilitator of your atmosphere of thought, right? And that when the outside world might be reflecting back this idea, without making it, again, blame or shame, right? We were talking about, I was picking up Luke from daycare, and one of these teachers were coming in with this little boy, and he says to the little boy, thank you for listening. And then he says, because I know how hard it is for you. And I thought, you're not teaching my kid. Like, I don't know. That's not happening. And so I could hear it, and I was telling Sue, because I could hear that in my spirit, I knew that there was something inside of me, because you can't hear what you haven't experienced. And I was asking her, what is a different way? Because it keeps reflecting and spinning in my mind that it's not so much what the teacher said, but what I heard and how I processed it from my own atmosphere of thought. And I said to her, what is a different way of saying that? And she so simplistically said, you need to flip it around. You know, I know we've talked about the fact that you struggle with listening. And you did so well with that. Well done.
because otherwise what you hear is, you did really well with listening, loser.
Right.
Right?
Right.
When it comes at the end, that's the last, it's like, you did really well this time, loser.
Yeah.
And so,
it really reminded me of when
Yeah.
I was in school and you struggle with certain things and bless my parents, like, you know, but they can only be what they are, right? And so we recognize that there's a communication style in our atmosphere of thought, and there's the way we deliver messages. And if something is striking you as odd, we often want the other person to change their behavior. And part of this work is looking at this. So I have been letting this like mull around. I talked to my teacher Tom about it, and he's like, well, you know, he kind of gave his opinion, and I'm like, nope, that's still not what I'm looking for. And so when we drove up, and I go, that's it, appreciation, right? We all want to be appreciated for the things that we bring. It doesn't mean that we get everything that we want. It doesn't mean that everything's going to go our way. But we all like for people to understand that we are all people, we have difficulties. And if we're going to talk about the difficulties, because you also said there was another part to that of being invited into the conversation, I think it was, right?
because to say it the way I originally said it is, I had to have had a conversation with you. You know, we had to have had a conversation about the fact that you struggle with listening. If we have never had that conversation, it's still can't be the thing that is at the end that says loser. It's, you know, in my observation, sometimes it seems like your struggle with listening. And boy, I can tell, you know, you're so committed to trying to expand and strengthen who you really are. It was well done. So you can even make an observation. How you make that observation from a base of loving kindness or a base of judgment. And judgment is so easy to fall into. It's actually kind of our brain is hardwired for that. But I think one of the things we teach that's so beautiful is that it's our job to be aware, to listen to what we think, to listen to what we say.
Self-aware.
Right, self-aware.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're not aware until it's already come out of our mouth. And sometimes it's not until we get, you know, home or next week or next month before we go, ooh, I could have done that better, huh?
And then not to
But
be difficult with ourselves
Right.
or beat ourselves up, and to be so sometimes these situations are medicine for our growth, our spiritual growth.
right.
Yeah.
So the work of Kristen Neff is fabulous work, and she talks about self-compassion. And one of the things that her exercises about self-compassion is to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone that you love about the same issue. And so I will say sometimes to myself, you should stop being so mean to my friend Sue. That was a very nasty thing to say to her. And Tracey and I were having some conversation recently, and I finally went over and I went, please stop being so mean to my friend Tracey. And because we say things and we don't even hear it a lot of times. And a beauty of this philosophy, because we are constantly saying, go within and listen and look and see how you could see things differently. Like I said, my most common prayer, Lord, help me to see this differently. The other thing we talked about that I dearly love is the concept of the law of averages. So I remember my first roots class I taught, there was a woman who went, look, here's my big beef with your philosophy. It's always a good lead into the conversation, don't you think? I went, what is that, Shannon? And she said, everybody's at choice and they choose what's happening in their life. She said, there is not there's not a woman in the world who chooses to be raped. There's no one who chooses to be beaten or stabbed or shot. It's just not something that people go, sign me up. That's what I want today. I'd like someone to come and shoot me. No, we don't. And in that very week, we were on the Troward section, and Troward talks about the law of averages. If we are not conscious, awake, and aware, and making high choices, then we simply are in the flow of the collective consciousness. We are in the flow of race consciousness, and in the flow of race consciousness, X percentage of people get go bankrupt. X percent of the people become millionaires. X percent get robbed. X percent get mugged. X percent get whatever. We are simply in that flow. But by being conscious, we rise above it. And so for me, the biggest question I ask myself if something is happening that I don't particularly like the outcome is, what can I do to just simply raise above the law of averages, raise above the race consciousness, rather than bad Sue, bad Sue, bad Sue. Although frequently that comes out and then I go, oh wait.
Yeah. Or use our circumstances to
Right.
stay in the same place, right?
Right.
Because if we don't, look at our circumstances as medicine, and usually I really feel like certain circumstance occurred I call it to put us back on the path home, right? And I know we are growing short on time, so what I wanted to know as we wrap up, Sue, in this lesson with aspen trees and the things that we talked about, can you somewhat tie them together on why we presented this to the
Right.
community, how come we did this dual talk, and what it means for us collectively as a group that we are growing into, for our vision for the future that we want to grow into.
So first of all, I will say come to the business meeting because we're going to talk a lot, but we're going to pull a lot of things together with what the past year has looked like and what the next year will look like. But there's a little set of papers that we'll give out at the end that has some of the big lessons that a lot of different sites have. And there are two of them that are really important to me that wraps it up. One is its resilience through the collective. They are resilient because this root system is so big, and that one tree that dies doesn't kill the whole forest. We are resilient together. We support each other together. And then unity, cooperation, and generosity is a part of what it means to have that united root structure. And so even if there are times when we're unkind to ourselves or we don't like the outcomes or what's going on, or at times when it's great, but it's that collective experience. You talked about when you described practitioners that they're there to support you when things aren't going well, but they're also there to support you when things are going well. And people forget, go to a practitioner when things rock. Mm-hmm. I'm serious. Go to a practitioner when things rock. Because if for any of you ever watch gymnastics, I'm just going to bring the geek in me out now, but in trampolining, when you're learning, there's a coach or a spotter who will push down on the trampoline so that it will give you a bigger bounce. That's what we do collectively. That's what we do as practitioners. Because Tracey said, practitioners stand up. I stood up because every minister is a practitioner first, and we remain one. But yeah, that process of saying, I can't talk and sit still. I think it's genetically impossible for me. Sorry. You can't take me anywhere.
I was going to give you permission to get up because I know this about it.
Anyway,
Yeah.
So for me, it's understanding that this is what we do, that tree, that forest of one tree, that collective root system, that's who we are for each other. And if we're willing to spend our time expanding our ideas, we expand each other's ideas as well.
And we rise above.
And we rise above the law of averages by definition because we are making conscious, awake, and aware choices.
Yeah. And then our future becomes bright with promise.
Right.
Which will be our theme rolling into 2025. That we are bright with promise and that everything we need is already here. And stepping into the flow, as you said, it's just learning to step in the flow and get out of resistance. Well, we did have this conversation, and I know we had to wrap it up, so we could talk about it another time. But once you realize in your resistance, we talked about how hard it is sometimes to get out of resistance because we have to ask ourselves, what box am I standing on? Do I want to be right? Do I want to understand? And, once you realize your resistance, the mind, the thinking mind in its nature does not want to, just because you realize it doesn't mean it wants to give up the fight, right? So sometimes it's really hard, but that's why we come back to our philosophy, we ground ourselves in spiritual principles, and we allow the flow to move us back in. And with grace, the community that is one structure, we begin to move and have our being as one unit. And we figure out ways to handle those difficulties that always come up in experiences with one another.
So I'm going to read you the quote, for the Bright with Promise quote.
Okay.
It is from the Science of Mind textbook, page 246. There'll be a test. Sorry. I see that the future is bright with promise. It beckons me forward into a more complete realization of my own worth and my rightful place in the universe. I look to the future with great and pleasurable anticipation, knowing it will expand my opportunity for radiant self-expression. I love my past and my future and understand that there are but continuations of the one unbroken chain of life. There is no future to be afraid of and no past to bring discord into the present.
Nice. And Sue, would you wrap us in prayer?
All right. So as we come together here today, I give thanks. I give thanks for this magnificent community of people who have come together to allow their minds and their souls to be expanded in this day. They have come together in love for this community. They have come together with a commitment to see who they are in this moment and to see that bright with promise future. That in this moment and in every moment, there is a kindness and love and compassion and wisdom and understanding that exists within this community, that are the root structure of this community, that allows the nutrients to be shared with each and every person here. And that out of that commitment to come together in that space of love and kindness and compassion, that in that space, the world shifts. Both inside and outside, the world shifts. And knowing that we have this common root structure and we can come together in support of each other, that is the gift. That is the promise for the future. So I know that as we go forward with this day and every day, that we do so with open hearts and minds, that we are willing to see things differently, that we are willing to see that bright promised future as being that which comes into fruition in our life. So I give thanks for this day, and I release it out into that synchronicity that is both love and law, knowing that indeed the universe has already said yes, and so it is.
So it is.